Good morning, Mr. Gartin.
Good morning.
I see you brought some guests, so you want to introduce them to the commission for us?
Sure, thank you. I have brought my wife Tara of 29 years, Nathan, Peter, and Elizabeth. We have a fourth, Joshua, who's away helping at a camp, so he couldn't be here today, but appreciate my team behind me today.
Well, welcome to all of you. We're ready to hear your opening remarks.
Thank you, Justice Wiggins and Commission. It is a privilege to be here. I serve on the District Nominating Commission for 2B, which is the 13 counties just to the north and northwest of us. And I have only a glimpse of what you are going through, but it is heavy lifting, and I appreciate the work that you are doing on behalf of Iowans. I have three sort of general points that I think would be helpful as a way of organizing my thoughts today. First, what I call judicial horsepower. Second, community service. And third, ability to work with others. So, judicial horsepower. I sort of made that term up. I hope it's helpful. And what I say when I think of judicial horsepower, it means the ability to do the critical reading, analysis, and writing that we're going to ask of our Supreme Court justices. So, what do I bring to the table? So, I have an undergraduate degree in English. I have a master's degree, a 3-year program in literature and linguistics, and those served me well as I went on to law school. Now, don't tell anyone, but I really loved law school. I loved every minute of it, and the reading and writing that I did in my undergraduate and graduate work prepared me for law school. I eventually became the lead articles editor for my law review. This was back in the time when legal research was done not with typing on a keyboard, but with these things called books. People may not remember that. The Northwest Reporter and other reporters, it came in book form. And so I spent a long time pulling books and researching cases, and I found it absolutely stimulating and delightful. But I went to law school to be a litigator, and I inhaled my evidence class. I loved criminal law, criminal procedure, and I served as captain on the mock trial team of my school under the direction of Judge Dara, who eventually became a federal district court judge in Chicago. I loved litigation. But that was 22 years ago. And as the saying goes, it is what you do that defines you. And so for the last 22 years, I've had a busy practice in Ames. It started out as a general practice, but doing a lot of trial work. And so I represented people who were accused of crimes. I did a lot of mental health and substance abuse cases, and I learned a great deal about the challenges our Iowa families face when dealing with those kinds of issues. I also handled a lot of juvenile work. But eventually, the transactional practice sort of overtook the trial practice. And so I started doing a high volume of residential real estate work. I do a lot of title work and wills, probate, setting up businesses. So while I have not been trying cases over the last 10 years, that is true. But what I have had the opportunity to do is to help teach lawyers. In your materials, you have 4 pages of presentations that I have been doing around the state for the last roughly 20 years, ranging from teaching new lawyers how to conduct themselves in residential real estate transactions to more complex real estate matters, such as the ones I give regularly at Drake University and the University of Iowa College of Law. But I hope you also noticed at the end of that list of presentations one that I'm particularly proud of, and that is a presentation I gave on Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 case that ended racial discrimination in public education. One of the things that I think is a distinctive of my presentations is that you always walk away with what I consider a scholarly outline that represents the status of the law in that particular area. So whether it's an ethics presentation on conflicts of interest, you will have every case in Iowa history right there in that outline, organized by its importance. Other activities that demonstrate judicial horsepower. I served 2 years as the chair of the Real Estate and Title Law section. I'm one of 2 Iowa lawyers who are fellows in the American College of Real Estate Lawyers. I teach trial advocacy at Iowa State every other spring semester, so the trial bug has not left me. And so I have the privilege of working with very bright juniors and seniors at Iowa State, many of whom would like to go to law school. I teach them how to conduct an effective and tight cross-examination. It is thrilling when they can finally pull that off. I am currently the co-editor for the upcoming revision of the Iowa Bar Association Real Estate Manual. Also in your materials, you have letters from lawyers from all over Iowa. Letters from people in small towns like Russell and Ellen Henry in Jewell, Iowa, and Dan Bappy in Nevada. People that you may not have run across, but some of the finest lawyers I know are practicing in small town practices, and they have found value in the work that I have done over the last 22 years. You also have letters from some of the larger firm attorneys like David Erickson and Nathan Barber and Tony Calacino, people that have made an indelible mark in real estate work here in Iowa. I'm also pleased that you have letters from 4 of our prior real estate co-chairs, chairs of the section, including Dan Moore, who's also a former president of the Iowa Bar Association. Very proud of having those letters of support. You also have a letter from University of Iowa College of Law professor Pat Bauer. Pat has had an incredible impact on the state, and I am privileged to have a letter of support from Pat. But also in those letters, you have letters of support from career prosecutors like Tim Meals, who I handled many criminal cases with. And so I'm privileged to have letters of support from people like him. I hope that these demonstrate a broad practice background and demonstrate judicial horsepower. In terms of community service, I think it is critical that lawyers give back in their community. In addition to the pro bono work I have done, there are 5 organizations that I want to highlight and how that work has impacted me personally. First of all, I've been very involved in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. Those individuals, those families have had a big impact on me and taught me about the importance of public service. Second, Habitat for Humanity. I love this organization, and it's taught me a great deal about the importance of affordable housing. Third, every Wednesday I go to one of our elementary schools and I work with a young man named Lucas. Lucas is an at-risk young man. He comes from a family with deep challenges. These are good people, but they have deep challenges. And I'm not sure if Lucas has learned more from me or if I have learned more from Lucas. And I believe that it is important that we find ways to give back, but particularly in the area of mentoring. All over Iowa, we have children who are waiting for a mentor. I want to live in a city and a state where we have a waiting list of adults and not a waiting list of children. Fourth, I've been very involved with my local NAACP chapter. This has had a significant impact on me as my friends have shared with me the challenges that African Americans still face here in Iowa. And finally, I have had a very wonderful time of service with the Ames City Council. This is a nonpartisan role, and I love being in a nonpartisan role. Along with 5 other city council members, we give leadership to a very diverse community with different needs and wants. We manage a budget of $234 million. Now that's important because one of the roles that our Supreme Court deals with is the area of judicial administration. The judicial budget is $177.6 million. And I think it's very important that we give great attention to this issue of judicial administration. We have to get beyond looking at the next budget cycle. It's just sort of going along, limping year by year as we try to figure out how to deal with the next budgetary cycle. We have to think long-term and find sustainable solutions, to think 10 and 20 years out into the future. I am here because of the Scouts, because of Habitat, because of my friend Lucas, because of my friends who strive for racial justice in the NAACP, and what I have learned as a servant leader in Ames. In terms of judicial temperament, the ABA defines judicial temperament as compassion, decisiveness, open-mindedness, sensitivity, courtesy, patience, freedom from bias, and commitment to equal justice. And I actually believe that my service on the City Council helps immensely in demonstrating what I think are parallel applications. In the City Council, we strive hard to make sure that everyone is treated the same. You see, I believe you should judge us not by how we treat the wealthiest and most powerful, but how we treat the least of these. We approach matters with an open mind. We encourage robust debate. And we have robust debates. But I'm very proud of the fact that we can disagree without being disagreeable. What an important concept in such a toxic world that we live in today. And that kind of civility is the kind of thing that I would like to continue and encourage with this Supreme Court. And we strive hard for consensus. And I'm pleased that you have a letter from Mayor John Halo in my support. I'm here because I believe I have the judicial horsepower. I believe the community service has impacted me and shaped the kind of person that I would be if I'm allowed to serve on the Iowa Supreme Court. And I believe I have the judicial temperament to contribute as well. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gartin. Mr. Gray?
No question.
Mr. Horvath? Ms. O'Brien?
No questions.
Mrs. Roberts? Mrs. Conover?
Good morning, Mr. Gartin. Thank you for coming in. I'm going to steal some questions that some of my fellow commissioners have asked some of the other applicants. You serve on a judicial nominating commission for a different court than the one we're looking at here today. But we've had a lot of discussion about the concept of diversity and what role that should play in our decision as commissioners for the next Supreme Court justice pick. And I'm curious about your opinion, especially based on your experience serving on the 2B Commission, as to what role diversity should play in our deliberations and what you bring to this position based on your own discussion of how diversity should play a role.
Yes, thank you for the question. And this is an issue that is facing us in my judicial district. We had no females serving as a district court judge. And so this was a subject that we had a very robust discussion of as on that commission. And so while I think it is very important that we strive to have a diversity of gender and ethnicity in all levels of government, in all sectors of government, I believe that what we should have is the job qualifications should be the highest importance. I'd also like to talk, if you're interested, we could talk about other issues of race facing the judicial system if people have interest in that. But I think it should be the merits of the candidate. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Bloom?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gartin, you bring a different form of diversity to this court, your practice, real estate and transactional law. I have to admit, when you came to my office, I think you were the third or fourth interview, and I was running behind on my reading and hadn't read your file yet and wondered why a transactional and real estate lawyer was applying to the Supreme Court as a litigator. You convinced me that your application is a very good idea. And in our discussion, you answered my question, give me some examples of some cases where having a real estate lawyer on the Supreme Court would have made a difference. And I wonder if you'd share those with the commission.
Certainly. I think there's a growing sense from lawyers all over Iowa that it is important to have diversity of practice areas on our court as well. I think it makes a difference if you've had lawyers who have read thousands of abstracts, helped other clients with wills in the probate process. An example of a case that was important to me in my decision to start thinking about this some time ago was the case of Martin versus Martin. And it was when I was serving as the chair of the real estate and title law section. And in Martin versus Martin, the court entered an opinion that said that divorce decrees cannot serve as a muniment of title. That means a deed. Well, in doing that, that case overturned 100 years of law in Iowa, and I don't think that the court intended to do that. My phone rang off the hook. Tim, what do we do? I think this was a mistake. And I said, I believe it was too, but I don't have a hotline to the Supreme Court. Eventually, the Supreme Court amended its opinion and fixed that mistake. But there are many other situations where I think it would be of great value to have not just the trial bar represented, but also transactional lawyers sitting there and working through these opinions. Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you.
Mr. Sukup? Ms. Stiekma?
Mr. Gartin, I know that you're a busy lawyer, you really work by yourself. They use judicial clerks in the Supreme Court. Could you just explain to us how you would use a judicial clerk if you were chosen as a Supreme Court justice?
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate that question. People vary in terms of how they use clerks. It would be my intention to write my own opinions. So I feel very comfortable as a writer but I would like to work with this clerk to assist with research and to provide an extra set of eyes, give them the challenge of finding mistakes in my reasoning, double check the cases that I cite. I also believe that there is a mentoring relationship that can take place with that clerk, and it would be my goal that if given the opportunity to serve, those clerks would then have an experience that would create a foundation for their practice. Thank you for the question.
Ms. Sinclair?
No questions.
Mr. Bevel?
No, thank you.
Dr. Taylor?
Good morning, and thank you for your application. I agree with you completely that there should be, breadth of different types of judicial practice in the Supreme Court. But one question that we've talked about today is people's levels of experience within the judicial system. And is it a requisite to first be, a practicing judge or a seated judge to be on the Supreme Court? Could you touch on what your theory about that is, one way or another?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Dr. Taylor. I think it's a valuable indicator of what I call judicial horsepower. Is it the only one? No. And in fact, I think that there is a great deal to be said for the kinds of experience that you gain from a transactional practice. I spend my days reading law, reading cases, and that experience I think would be very beneficial in this setting. So I think it's important, but I certainly don't think it's determinative. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Diaz? Mr. Berger? Mrs. Bowden?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. When we spoke previously, you indicated you were also very interested in legislation. I believe you've helped draft some legislation or submitted legislation. What types of subjects have you assisted in legislation, drafting litigation?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ms. Bowden. So I helped write a section of code, again, this is a little boring, bear with me, dealing with mechanic liens. And so it is a subject near and dear to my heart, and so I was a part of a team of lawyers who worked with Iowa Title Guarantee and the Secretary of State to draft a change. Iowa now has what's called a pre-lien notice requirement. And so in order to be entitled to a lien, you have to go through this process. I'm very proud of this, but it was interesting. It took 5 years for this to get through. I was shocked. There were a lot of different stakeholders that had to have their say. And part of that, one of the benefits of having worked on actual legislation is that I have a tremendous respect for our legislature. So when evaluating a case, I'm going to have a posture of deference to our legislature. They get to write the rules, and it's our task to apply those. But that was a very positive experience for me, but very educational. Thanks for the question.
Ms. Pearson? I have a question. How many cases do you think dealing with real estate law does the Supreme Court do maybe in a year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Justice Wiggins. I went back and took a look at the cases that this court has taken up since November, and understand it's going to vary in terms of the cycle. So in some years there'll be more criminal cases than others. We have a very robust type level of criminal cases right now because of the interest in the Iowa Constitution as a safeguard for the rights of the accused. But since November 17th, this court has issued 92 opinions. And of those 92 opinions, 10 of them have been transactional in orientation. 42 of them have been criminal in orientation. So I like criminal work, and so I'd be very excited to work on those type of cases. But I was interested too, Justice Wiggins, and it was pleasing to me that I believe that a transactional lawyer would have great value in a substantial number of these cases. Thanks for asking the question.
Thank you. Any other further questions?
Just one.
Mr. Bloom?
I shouldn't rely on my memory, but I think you were the only applicant who is currently sitting on a city council, especially of a large town. And I was wondering, in that role, you must see a lot of things that where the city impact relates to the law. Could you just comment on how being on the city council might make you a better Supreme Court justice?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question. It's been very shaping, and I could probably take an hour in unpacking that. I think it's everything from the substantive issues where we're asked to draft ordinances that balance different interests in the community. Now, that's more of a legislative type focus than what the court does here. But I don't have the liberty of just thinking about one constituency. I have to think about everyone. And so I have to listen. I have to weigh the pros and cons of different sides. But I also love the impact in terms of how we work together to reach consensus. I love our U.S. Supreme Court. I love the civility they model. So Chief Justice, or not Chief Justice, but Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg were very close friends. I love that. And so here you have people that differ ideologically, but can be very close relationally. And don't we need that in all levels of government? I think people are so tired of the toxicity. And I'm very privileged to serve in a nonpartisan role. I value nonpartisan contexts, and this would be one of them.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Any further questions? Well, we thank you, Mr. Gartin, for appearing this morning, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.